That morning, the air was clear. The sun wasn't shining brightly yet, but the city was already buzzing at a pace that Eric hadn't kept up with for months. Since his wife's death, his life had been limited to the essentials: little sleep, minimal food, and maximum work. Everything else, social life, emotions, presence, he put off for later. Or perhaps never again. But that day, his regular driver couldn't make it. A fever, a minor sickness, something light, but enough to put him behind the wheel, with his son Leo in the back seat, a backpack on his shoulders, and a faint smile from having his dad there. "You haven't come with me for a long time," the boy said, glancing sideways while playing with his shoelaces. Eric nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "Yes, it's been a while. Are you going to drop me off at the gate or take me to the classroom?" Leo asked. "To the classroom," Eric replied without thinking. Then he wondered why he had said that. Maybe he just wanted to see where his son spent most of his days. Maybe he wanted to breathe in an atmosphere that wasn't choked by silence and memories. Or maybe, and he would never have the courage to admit this, he was tired of pretending that everything was under control. He parked, got out of the car, and waited for Leo to get his backpack in place. The boy walked with a lightness that Eric envied. The way he smiled at other children, how he greeted the guards, everything about him was light. And that hurt. Because Eric knew, deep down, that he couldn't return even half of that light to him. The school hallway was colorful and quiet, the sounds muffled by walls covered in children's drawings and school notices. The smell of chalk and tempera paint brought back memories he didn't know he had. "It's here," Leo said, stopping in front of a door with animal figures and colorful letters. Eric smiled slightly and held the doorknob. When he opened it, time stood still. She was there. Julia? Her back was to him, her hair in a simple bun, writing something on the blackboard. The handwriting was familiar, beautiful, and firm, and the feeling was immediate. Eric's entire body tensed. His heart pounded as if it hadn't in years, and for a second, he thought it was a cruel coincidence. But then she turned around, and the world fell into a silence that hurt his ears. Her eyes, the same ones, found him as if they knew exactly where he would be. Only they weren't ready to see. The marker fell from her hand without a sound, and her mouth parted slightly, as if she were trying to form a word that wouldn't come out. Eric stood in the doorway. He wanted to say something, anything. But everything in him was frozen. Julia didn't move. She just looked at him, with an expression that mixed surprise, contained pain, and a strength that he recognized. The strength of someone who learned to keep going even when all they wanted was to stop. The time between them was broken by Leo. "Teacher Julia," he said, running to her and hugging her around the waist. She looked down. She knelt slowly and returned the hug with a fragile smile. "Hello, my love. Good morning." Eric felt something break inside, an invisible but loud sound. The tone of her voice, the way she called his son. That hit him harder than he wanted to admit. "This is my dad," Leo said, pointing back, not noticing the tension in the air. "He came with me today because Daniel got sick." She stood up slowly. Her eyes didn't leave him. "Eric," she finally said, her voice a mere thread. He nodded, his throat dry, his hands cold. "Julia?" She took a deep breath. She didn't smile, but she also didn't look away. "How long has it been?" "Years," he replied automatically. Leo looked at them both, then refocused on his backpack. "Teacher Julia is the best of all," he said, with the lightness of someone who doesn't feel the chasms between adults. "She understands me without me having to talk." Eric looked at her again, and he saw it. In her eyes, on her face, in her chest that rose and fell slowly. She felt everything. Everything he felt too. The past alive, the present confused, and a question that floated between the two of them, but that neither dared to voice. Julia turned back to the blackboard. She tried to resume her interrupted gesture. Eric wanted to say that he was surprised, that he didn't know, that it was good to see her. But no phrase seemed right. Everything sounded too small in the face of what was there. The bell rang. The children came running in, laughing, bringing too much life into that space that, seconds before, had seemed frozen in time. Julia stepped away from Leo and looked at Eric one last time. "It was good to see you." And then she turned away. Eric stood still. The children passed by him. A girl stumbled against his leg and apologized. He didn't respond. He just looked at the place where she had been. The trace of her perfume, the tone of her voice, the lack of explanations, everything mixed in his chest. He left the classroom without remembering if he had said goodbye to Leo. He walked down the hallway like someone trying to wake up from a dream they don't want to remember, but also can't forget. Outside, the world was the same. But inside, Eric knew it. He had entered that school to drop off his son, but he left with the past burning in his hands. Eric didn't sleep that night, not from insomnia, but from an excess of memories. Julia's face, the way she avoided touching him with words, her gaze so firm, yet at the same time pleading for distance. Everything throbbed inside him. Everything brought a question that he didn't dare to voice out loud. What if it wasn't just about her? The next morning, even though his driver had recovered, Eric insisted on taking Leo. He said he enjoyed accompanying him. Was it a lie? Or maybe it wasn't a complete lie. There was something about that school that drew him, and he couldn't decide if it was curiosity, guilt, or something deeper, murkier, and sadder. In the back seat, Leo chattered about drawings, games, and new friends. Eric listened little, but enough to understand that there was someone special there. "A friend," Leo said, taking his lunchbox out of his backpack. "Yesterday Oscar lent me his pencil case, and he helped me finish the block castle. He's good at that. Everyone likes Oscar." The name resonated strangely. Familiar. Oscar. Eric only responded with a sound of approval as he parked. The school was bustling, with hurried mothers, running children, and teachers smiling with visible fatigue already in their eyes. He walked with Leo down the colorful hallway, but something felt different. As if everything had a background noise, as if there was an emotional frequency only he could hear. Julia wasn't at the classroom door. He noticed it immediately. Maybe she was late. Maybe she was avoiding him. He knelt down to kiss his son on the forehead and say goodbye. It was then that he heard running footsteps. "Mom?" The word hit him like a punch to the stomach. Eric turned instinctively. A small boy, perhaps the same age as Leo, came running down the hall toward a figure who had just appeared from behind the classroom door. It was her. Julia. She knelt to receive the boy's hug, and for an instant, everything around him disappeared. It was just the two of them. The gesture was natural, familiar. And then the boy turned. It was only a second, but it was enough. Eric felt his entire body freeze, as if he were looking into a strange mirror, not of the present, but of many years ago. That face wasn't unfamiliar. Intense blue eyes, just like his own. Dark hair, fair skin, a defined jaw, an arrogant look, as if the world had always been his. The boy smiled and walked directly toward Eric, without hesitation. "You're Leo's dad, right?" Eric blinked. His throat was dry. He nodded slowly. "My mom says he's my soul brother." The phrase came out lightly, as if it carried no weight. But Eric felt the ground disappear. Julia was standing behind, her face pale, her eyes fixed on him. There was a plea for silence in them, but also a subtle desperation, a panic that only someone who holds a secret too big can feel. "And you are?" Eric managed to say, swallowing hard. "Oscar. My name is Oscar." He smiled, like someone who doesn't understand the earthquake he just caused. Eric tried to smile back. He couldn't. He just nodded, feeling his stomach churn. Julia came closer, took the boy's hand, and looked directly into his eyes. "Come on, Oscar. Class is about to start." "Okay," the boy replied, still looking curiously at Eric. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, as if pleading for understanding, control, time. Eric stood there. "What?" The hallway was spinning. He didn't know what to do with this. Oscar. The name now had form, voice, eyes, face, and that face, it was his. It was as if the past had created a replica and thrown it back in front of his eyes. He left there like someone fleeing from a fire. He got into the car, closed the doors, and took a deep breath. But he couldn't. The air wouldn't come. He took out his cell phone. He looked for some explanation. He wanted to call someone. The lawyer. His brother. God, anyone who could look at him and tell him, "No, Eric, you're imagining things." But the image was too vivid to be an illusion. On his phone screen, he opened the photo gallery. He scrolled through old images, from when he was younger, from when his wife was still alive, from when Leo was a baby. And then he stopped at a forgotten image, a selfie, taken years ago, still with Julia. They were laughing, their faces close together. And there he saw what he hadn't wanted to see before. The eyes. Those eyes. He closed the gallery. He dropped the phone on the seat and rested his elbows on the steering wheel. Oscar. The name resonated like a drum, beating slowly in his chest. If this was true, and everything in him said it was, then someone had hidden an entire life from him. A life with his face. He went back to work like a man walking on broken glass. He spoke with employees and signed documents, but everything seemed muted, as if the world were in the background, and only the image of Oscar was in focus. That night, Leo ate dinner while recounting stories from school. The teacher said next week there's a presentation. I want to be the narrator. Oscar's going to be the dragon. He loves being the villain. Eric managed a forced smile. You like him, don't you? Yeah, he's my real friend. We like the same things. And I don't know. It's like we already knew each other before. Eric looked away. That squeezed something tight inside him. Yes, in a way, they already knew each other. Through blood. The night was long. Eric couldn't look away from the mirror. He stared at himself with a stranger's eyes. He tried to remember. He tried to piece it together. How many months after they broke up were they apart? How many days passed between their last kiss and his disappearance? Was it possible? Everything told him yes, and the way Julia had looked at him wasn't with a look of surprise at his doubt. It was the look of someone who feared his question. Eric knew he couldn't just run to her. He couldn't demand anything. But inside him, something couldn't be contained anymore. The image of Oscar. The simple phrase, "My mom says he's my soul brother." That was stuck to his skin. He didn't sleep. Again. And at dawn, all he wanted was to see that boy again. With his own eyes. Because now, he needed to know. If that reflection that walked, talked, and smiled was just a coincidence of a face, or a secret that had lived for too long in the darkness, Eric returned home like someone carrying on his shoulders a name he never knew was his. And now it was too late to simply go on as if nothing had happened. Oscar had a face, a voice, a history, and everything about him screamed something the world had never told him. That night was the most silent of all. Not even Leo spoke much. He seemed to sense that his dad was distant, not in body, but in his gaze. Eric sat on the living room sofa, turned off the television, turned off the lights, and held his phone. He opened the photo gallery. He went all the way to the end, sifting through the years like someone searching for air underwater. There she was, Julia, smiling on a park bench, with an ice cream that was beginning to melt. Her eyes shone in a way he had never seen in anyone else, not in his wife, Aurora, not in anyone. Another picture showed the two of them sitting at a restaurant in Valencia. She had her head on his shoulder. Her eyes were closed. He had that half smile of someone who believes love will last. That love is enough, but what hurt the most was the date. 2 months before everything changed. 2 months before he made the decision that made him lose everything without realizing it. Eric let the phone fall onto his chest and closed his eyes. It was impossible not to remember that day. The call from Aurora. Her voice was too calm. Her words were measured with surgical precision. "I'm pregnant, Eric." Silence. He remembered the bitter taste that rose in his throat. The shock. The panic. But also the obligation to do the right thing. Or what he believed was right. Aurora was his fiancée, and although their relationship wasn't one of passion, there was respect. There was history. Families were involved. Expectations. And now, a life. That same week, he pulled away from Julia. Without explanations, he simply disappeared. He didn't have the courage to look her in the eyes. He didn't have the courage to tell her that the love they were building was going to be buried by a duty from the past. Eric got up from the sofa like someone fleeing from his own body. He went to the desk drawer, rummaged for a few minutes until he found a small wooden box. He opened it carefully. Inside, there were letters, handwritten by Julia. They didn't say, "I love you," but they said it in every line, in every simple phrase, in every part where she wrote, "I thought of you when I saw a man reading Bukowski on the subway," or, "This song reminded me of you. I don't know why." At the bottom of the box, there was a photo. He had his arm around her shoulders, the two of them lying on the grass, laughing at some nonsense. Her face was half turned, but her smile was the same as Oscar's. The revelation came like an avalanche. He never knew. Julia never told him. And now, all he had was the echo of what could have been. Eric spent the entire night in silence, sitting on the floor, looking at that picture. And at some point, he whispered, "What if I had chosen you?" The question echoed through the house. No one answered. But inside him, the answer came with a bitter taste. He didn't choose her, and in the process, he lost the love of his life. And perhaps, a son. The next day, Eric didn't take Leo to school. He didn't want to see anyone. He canceled meetings, turned off his cell phone. He didn't want questions. He just wanted to understand how everything had slipped through his fingers. He went back to an old folder of emails and searched for messages from Julia. He found one from 4 days before his conversation with Aurora. She had written, "I feel like something's wrong. You're quieter, more distant. I'd like to know what's happening. If it's something else, if it's someone, just tell me. Just don't disappear." He had disappeared. She had warned him. She had tried. And now that absence was collecting interest. Eric closed the computer and looked at himself in the hallway mirror. His hair was grayer. His eyes were more sunken. His skin was more tired. He was a successful man, a widower, a father, respected, but deeply broken. And the worst part was, he was broken by something he himself had chosen. In his attempt to do the right thing, he may have made the biggest mistake of his life. In the middle of the afternoon, He got in his car and drove without a destination. He just wanted to drive, to forget, to breathe a different kind of air. But his thoughts pounded against the walls of his head like a runaway train. He remembered Aurora, the birth of Leo, the routine of being a father, the difficult first years, the guilt, and how, even living beside his wife, he felt that a piece of his soul had been trapped the day he didn't reply to Julia's last message. Did she deserve to know? Did she deserve to have been included in the decision? He asked himself that question 100 times, but the answer no longer mattered, because what hurt now was what she had never said. She knew, and yet she had remained silent. And that killed him a little more. Eric stopped the car at a secluded viewpoint from where he could see the whole city. He turned on the radio, but nothing made sense. He opened the glove compartment and took out an old photo of a newborn Leo beside Aurora. He was so small, so defenseless, and Eric remembered what he felt holding his son for the first time. An indescribable force, a certainty that his life, from that moment on, had changed forever. And now, there was the possibility of having lived all that a second time, without knowing it. Oscar. The name now carried a weight. The face carried a weight, and Julia's silence weighed more than everything else. On his way home, he stopped at a traffic light, and, without knowing why, he typed her name into Instagram. The profile was private. The profile picture was a child's drawing, a son and two figures holding hands. He clicked. He enlarged the image. One of the figures was taller. It had blue eyes. The other, smaller, held the hand of the taller one. Eric felt his stomach sink. He closed his phone. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel. This was no longer a supposition. He knew, even without confirmation, even without DNA, even without words. He knew it. And more than that, he knew that sooner or later, he would have to face it. Because a forgotten love can fall asleep, but a son cannot. And that was what was about to wake up. The pieces of the puzzle have come together. What do you think Eric's next step will be? That morning, Eric put on the most neutral white shirt he could find in his closet. He buttoned it without rushing. He put his watch on his left wrist, adjusted the collar. He wasn't a vain man, but this trip to the school wouldn't be like the others. It was no longer just for Leo. It was to see Oscar, to see Julia. He breathed deeply before getting out of the car at the school gate. The morning air felt denser, as if it knew there was something unresolved within those colorful walls. He walked through the yard with a posture that tried to seem casual. He nodded to the principal, smiled at a groundskeeper sweeping dry leaves, and subtly kept an eye on the classroom where Leo and Oscar studied. He didn't go in. He just waited, like someone circling a memory, afraid to face it. At dismissal, Julia appeared, holding Oscar's hand. Eric stood under the shade of a nearby tree and watched. She spoke to him as if the world could stop right there, just between the two of them. Her body language was one of complete devotion, a clean love, without demands, without rush. The boy smiled, confident and secure. Eric couldn't look away, not even when she turned and saw him. Their eyes met. She paused for a second. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him. Then, she looked back at Oscar, took his backpack, and they both continued toward the exit. Eric felt the weight of what she didn't say. He felt the silent scream behind the serenity. In the days that followed, he began to show up more often. He told Leo that he wanted to be around a little more. "It feels good to see you growing up." The boy smiled, not suspecting what lay beneath the surface. Eric would stay in the car for a few minutes, then walk through the yard like someone in no hurry to leave. A coffee here, a conversation there. In time, the staff began to know him by name. One of the older guards greeted him with a certain respect. "You're Leo's dad, right?" Eric nodded. Yes. Good kid. Very good friends with Oscar. They're always together." Eric wanted to smile, but he couldn't. The guard continued, not noticing the tension. "You know, Julia is a fighter. She raised Oscar all by herself, from the very beginning. She never wanted to say who the father was, and believe me, people asked. But she always found a way to change the subject. She said what mattered was the love she gave him, and she's got plenty of that. Believe me." Eric just nodded. The man walked away, and Eric stood there. What? His head was spinning. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't just him she kept the secret from. She had carried everything alone, all these years, without blaming anyone, without asking for help, without using the child as a punishment or a currency of pain. That hurt more than any accusation, because it was silence, not punishment. It was absence, not revenge. Eric began to observe the small gestures, the way she knelt in front of the children to speak to them at eye level, the care in the details, the affection without exaggeration, the tone of her voice, firm yet gentle. And when she bent down to tie Oscar's shoelaces or adjust his hat, Eric saw more than a mother. He saw a woman who made do with what she had, who didn't wait for anyone, who loved without guarantees. On Friday, something changed. Leo ran out of the classroom smiling. Oscar came right behind him. They were talking about a soccer game they would have on Monday. Eric was waiting for them, sitting on a nearby bench. Oscar looked at him. He stopped for a moment. "You're Leo's dad, right?" Eric smiled faintly. "Yes, I am. He talks about you. He says you know how to build card castles better than anyone." "He's exaggerating," Eric replied in a lighter tone. Oscar smiled. "My mom knows how to build things too, but she prefers to read." Eric felt a knot form. "Your mom is incredible," he said, discreetly looking toward the spot where Julia was talking to another teacher. Oscar nodded, as if confirming an absolute truth. "Yeah, she is." Eric wanted to ask so many things, but he couldn't. Not with Leo listening, not with Julia nearby. The boy left with a slight wave. Eric stayed a little longer. As he walked past the school mural on his way out, something caught his attention. A child's drawing, stuck with tape. It was crooked, almost falling off. He walked closer. It was Oscar's, signed with large, almost trembling letters. On the paper, a tall man holding hands with a smaller boy. Both seen from behind, looking toward a yellow sun in the corner of the page. The man had blue eyes. The boy had a huge smile. The man had no face, just a back. Eric felt his breath catch. His hands trembled. He just stood there. The heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo in the hallway. Julia appeared in the distance. She saw the scene. She saw him standing there. She saw the drawing. But she didn't approach. She just stood where she was. They looked at each other from a distance, and once again, there was no sound. Only that silence that screamed louder than any word. Eric lowered his gaze. He gently touched the paper without pulling it off the mural, as if that drawing said everything she had never said, everything he had never heard, everything they had let slip away. She rated a hero from behind, because she never had the chance to see him from the front. And in that instant, Eric understood that what separated him from Oscar wasn't absence. It was time. Too much time in silence. Too much time away. Too much time without knowing what could have been. But there, in front of that crooked paper, in front of that boy he saw, but couldn't call his son, In front of a woman who still didn't look at him with eyes full of the past, he understood that no matter how much it hurt, he needed to hear it from her mouth, what that silence was hiding. Even if it destroyed everything, even if nothing was left, because her every gesture said what she never said aloud, and he could no longer bear to keep listening in silence. That morning, Eric put on the most neutral white shirt he could find in his closet. He buttoned it slowly. He put his watch on his left wrist and adjusted his collar. He wasn't a vain man, but this trip to the school wouldn't be like the others. It wasn't just for Leo anymore. It was to see Oscar, to see Julia. At the school gate, he took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The morning air seemed denser, as if it knew there was something unresolved within those colorful walls. He walked through the yard with a posture that tried to look casual. He greeted the principal with a slight nod, smiled at an employee sweeping dry leaves, and discreetly glanced toward the classroom where Leo and Oscar were studying. He didn't go in. He just waited, like someone circling a memory, afraid to confront it. At dismissal, Julia appeared holding Oscar's hand. Eric stood in the shade of a nearby tree. He watched. She spoke to him as if the world could stop right there, just between the two of them. Her body language was one of devotion, pure love, without demands, without rush. The boy smiled, confident, secure. Eric couldn't tear his eyes away, not even when she turned and saw him. Their eyes met. She paused for a second. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him. Then, she looked at Oscar again, took his backpack, and they both continued toward the exit. Eric felt the weight of what she didn't say. He felt the silent scream behind her serenity. In the following days, he began to show up more frequently. He told Leo that he wanted to be closer for a bit. "It's good for me to see you grow up." The boy smiled without suspecting what was behind it. Eric would stay in his car for a few minutes, then walk through the yard like someone in no hurry to leave. A coffee here, a conversation there. Over time, the staff began to know him by name. One of the older janitors greeted him with a certain respect. "You're Leo's dad, right?" Eric nodded. "Yes, good boy. Very good friends with Oscar. They're always together." Eric wanted to smile, but he couldn't. The janitor continued, not noticing the tension. "You know, Julia is a fighter. She raised Oscar all by herself, from the beginning. She never wanted to say who the father was. And believe me, people asked. But she always found a way to change the subject. She said what mattered was the love she gave him. And she has plenty of that. Believe me." Eric felt the air leave his lungs for a second. She never told? Never? He just nodded. The man walked away, and he stayed there. She hadn't just hidden it from him. She had carried it all herself, all these years, without blaming anyone, without asking for help, without using the child as a punishment or a currency of pain. That hurt more than any accusation, because it was silence, not punishment. It was absence, not revenge. Eric began to observe the small gestures, the way she knelt in front of the children to speak to them at eye level, the care in the details, the affection without exaggeration, the tone of her voice, firm but sweet. And when she knelt to tie Oscar's shoelaces or adjust his cap, Eric saw more than a mother. He saw a woman who made it work with what she had, who didn't wait for anyone, who loved without guarantees. On Friday, something changed. Leo ran out of the classroom smiling. Oscar came right behind him. They were talking about a soccer match they would have on Monday. Eric was waiting for them, sitting on a nearby bench. Oscar looked at him. He paused for a moment. "You're Leo's dad, right?" Eric smiled slightly. "Yes, I am. He talks about you," Oscar said. "He says you know how to build card castles better than anyone." He exaggerates, Eric replied in a lighter tone. Oscar smiled. My mom knows how to build things too, but she prefers to read. Eric felt a knot forming in his throat. Your mom is incredible, he said, discreetly looking toward where Julia was talking to another teacher. Oscar nodded, as if confirming an absolute truth. Yes, she is. Eric wanted to ask so many things, but he couldn't. Not with Leo listening, not with Julia nearby. The boy left with a slight wave. Eric stayed for a while longer. As he walked past the school mural on his way out, something caught his attention. A child's drawing, taped to the wall. It was crooked, almost falling off. He walked closer. It was Oscar's, signed with large, almost trembling letters. On the paper, a tall man holding hands with a smaller boy. Both were turned away, looking toward a yellow sun in the corner of the page. The man had blue eyes. The boy had a huge smile. The man had no face, just his back. Eric felt his breath catch. His hands were trembling. He stood there. What? His heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the hallway. Julia appeared in the distance. She saw the scene. She saw him standing there. She saw the drawing. But she didn't come closer. She just stayed where she was. They looked at each other from afar, and again, without a sound. Just that silence that screamed louder than any word. Eric lowered his gaze. He gently touched the paper, without pulling it from the mural. As if that drawing said everything she had never said, everything he had never heard, everything they had let slip away. She created a hero with his back turned, because she never had the chance to see him face to face. And in that instant, Eric understood that what separated him from Oscar wasn't absence. It was time. Too much time in silence. Too much time away. Too much time not knowing what could have been. But there, in front of that crooked paper, in front of that child he saw, and couldn't call his son, in front of a woman who still didn't look at him with eyes full of the past, he understood that no matter how much it hurt, he needed to hear from her mouth, what that silence was hiding, even if it destroyed everything, even if nothing was left. Because every one of her gestures said what she never said out loud, and he couldn't stand to keep listening in silence anymore. The truth is on the brink of being revealed. Should we write the conversation between Eric and Julia, or do you want to explore something else first? That afternoon, Eric didn't take Leo. He didn't stay in the car, nor did he wander through the yard. For the first time, he entered the school with a single objective. His shirt was damp on his back. His breath was caught between his stomach and chest. Each step weighed more than the last. He waited near the classroom door, hidden enough not to be seen by the students, but close enough to hear her voice from inside. She was talking to the children about planets. She used simple comparisons, laughter, calmness. But he felt the opposite. His hand trembled as he held the doorknob. He didn't go in. He waited, and waited, until the children came out, one by one, running, with backpacks bigger than their bodies. Some of them smiled at him. Leo came out last, with Oscar. They were talking about dinosaurs. Oscar looked at Eric, giving him a shy wave. Eric replied with a contained smile. Then, she appeared. Julia, carrying papers and her bag on her shoulder, as if it were just another end of the day. But her hesitant eyes betrayed that she knew. She knew he was there for more than a casual visit. Eric took a breath. He clenched his jaw. He took 2 steps forward. Julia? She stopped, her back to him. Her entire body seemed to freeze, her hand locked on the strap of her bag. She took a moment to turn around. Is Oscar my son? The hallway seemed to shrink. Everything around them blurred. She didn't answer. She didn't turn around. She just closed her eyes. Do you really need to ask? Her voice was low. but it carried an entire lifetime within it. Eric felt his chest constrict. "Answer me, Julia." She turned slowly. Her face was thinner. Her eyes were sunken. She wasn't the woman from before. But she was. And seeing her like this hurt more than he expected. She looked at him directly, without shouting, without drama. Just the raw truth between them. "You were with her, Eric. Married. With a son. With status." The pause hurt more than any word. "And what did I have?" She opened her arms as if looking for something to show and finding nothing. "Memories. And a baby growing up alone." He tried to defend himself. "She was my fiancée. She was pregnant. I thought it was the right thing to do." "Maybe it was for you," she interrupted, without raising her voice. "But for me, it was the end." She knelt, opened her bag, and took out a small, simple box, made of light wood. It was worn at the corners. She held it out to him. Eric took it, not understanding. He opened it. Inside, a hospital bracelet. One of those placed on a baby's wrist right after birth. It had the name Oscar. In the field for father, there was a dash. Nothing. An empty space filling a place that should have been his. "I didn't look for you," she said. Not out of pride. Not out of revenge. Her voice wavered, but didn't break. "I understood, Eric. I understood that you were no longer mine." He lowered his gaze. He held the bracelet like someone holding a child for the first time, even if it was years late. "You should have told me," she laughed. A laugh without humor. A tired laugh. "Tell you what? That you destroyed everything with a decision that didn't include me? That you left without saying anything?" "I was waiting for an explanation, Eric, not an apology. And it never came. You didn't know, and that's what hurts the most. You left without knowing. But I stayed. Knowing. Feeling. Seeing his face every day and trying not to think of you." She took 2 steps toward him. "I preferred Oscar to grow up away from doubt, away from the feeling of being someone's mistake." She rummaged in her bag. She took out a folded sheet of paper. "He did this last week. I thought you should see it." Eric took it. He unfolded it carefully. A simple drawing. A male figure, facing forward, holding the hand of a smaller boy. The sky in the background. A big sun. He had a hat, a face, a smile. "He used to draw you like that from when he was little," she said. "Without a face, but he always knew someone was missing." Eric squeezed the paper with both hands. His eyes began to burn. He looked at her like someone searching for something beyond the pain. Something that could still resist amid the wreckage. "Julia." His voice was low, raw. "I never forgot you. Not a single day." She paused. Her mouth trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked several times, as if trying to keep control. But she couldn't. 2 tears escaped. Silent. "Me neither." Her voice was broken. "I didn't forget you either." Eric took a step forward, but he stopped. She didn't move either. Neither of them touched. The hallway was empty. The school was almost silent. But between them, there was an invisible noise. An energy that didn't dissipate. Time, for an instant, seemed suspended. They stood there, face to face, between what they were and what they failed to be. What was there was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement. It was love that had survived absence. Eric wanted to say more, but there was nothing left to say at that moment. No promises, no explanations, just the weight of what was lost, and the certainty that she never stopped feeling. The truth is finally out. What do you think will happen now? Do you want to see how Eric navigates his relationship with Oscar and Julia? The beginning of a new chapter. That night, Eric didn't return home whole, nor did he return in pieces. He came back like a man with a fragment of glass lodged in his chest, trying to walk without cutting himself from the inside. He slept little. When he finally managed to, he spent most of the time with his eyes open, the ceiling above and a void inside. He didn't know how to move forward. He only knew he couldn't go back. In the following days, the routine returned, but he did not. He drove Leo to school at the same time, walked the same hallways and saw the same faces, but something in him no longer inhabited that place as before. Julia still kept her distance, professional, polite, silent, and Oscar. Oscar was more present than ever. Even if he didn't know the weight he carried, even if he laughed and ran through the yard like any other child. Oscar was a living mirror, and Eric could no longer look away. The way he frowned in concentration, the gesture of raising an eyebrow when he was curious, the habit of biting the corner of his lips when he was thinking, it was all his. Small details that no one else would notice, but which he recognized as if seeing a broken reflection of himself. It was as if time was testing the resilience of silence. But now, the silence was coming from Eric. Not out of cowardice, but out of respect. After everything he had heard, he understood that Julia didn't need a man trying to fix what he had broken. She needed space. And Oscar needed care. Something real, not promises. That's why he watched, from a distance, with a heart that was slowly being swallowed by that innocent presence so much like his own. Building a present until one day, without saying anything to anyone, he entered a children's store in the city center. He walked down the aisles like someone exploring an unknown territory. He saw toys, books, tiny clothes. His throat tightened. Everything there spoke of childhood, of lost time. Everything seemed to say, this space was yours, and you didn't even know it. At the back of the store, he found what he was looking for, a photo album, a light gray cloth cover. No title. He bought it. He paid in cash. At home, he took a pen, and with a firm hand, he wrote on the cover, "For the part of my life that I can still get to know." He stared at those words for long minutes. They weren't poetry. They weren't grand. But they were true. The next day, he took Leo, as usual. But before his son went in, he said, "You go first. I'll catch up inside." Leo nodded, used to it. Eric waited. And when Oscar appeared, alone, with his pencil case in his hand and his backpack slung over one shoulder, Eric took a deep breath, knelt, and said without rehearsing, "Hi, Oscar." The boy stopped. He smiled slightly, his gaze shy but curious. "Hi." Eric held out the package, without many words. "This is for you, if you want it." Oscar took it. He looked at the cover. Then he looked at him. "What is it?" "A photo album, but it's empty." Oscar frowned, confused. "Why?" "Because I want to start a collection of memories with you," Eric replied, not looking away. "But only if you want to." Oscar fell silent. He held the album in his two small hands. His eyes examined every corner, as if it were a map to a place he wasn't sure he wanted to enter yet. "What are we going to put in it?" Eric smiled slightly. "Everything that's important to us. Photos, drawings, candy wrappers, if you want. It doesn't matter what matters is that it's ours." The silence lasted for seconds, but it seemed to expand his entire chest. Then Oscar nodded. "Okay." Eric didn't move. The boy broke into a small but genuine smile. A smile that said, "Yes." And that, on its own, was more than Eric had expected. He didn't say anything else. He didn't ask if he could call him son. He didn't try to force a feeling. He just offered what he had. Presence. and Oscar accepted that. Julia watched from a distance. She was at the classroom door. She saw the gesture but didn't intervene. She didn't do anything. But the way she leaned her back against the wall afterward said it all. That night, Eric took an empty picture frame from his drawer and placed the first drawing Oscar had given him of the two of them riding bikes, still without a face, but with both of them smiling. Leo saw the frame on the table and asked, "Who drew that?" "Oscar," Eric replied simply. "He's my best friend." "I know. You like him, right?" Eric paused. He thought, and said, "Very much." Leo didn't ask any more questions. He grabbed an apple and left the kitchen. Eric stayed there, with the frame in his hand, thinking about everything he hadn't lived, but could still live. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about taking responsibility for the present, without haste, without demands, but with truth. And that night, for the first time in weeks, he slept without pain in his chest, without guilt screaming, without the feeling that everything was lost, because he couldn't change what had ceased to be. But he could finally choose who he wanted to be now. My family. The days that followed were calm on the surface, but intense inside. Eric, who used to enter the school with his body present and his heart far away, now walked with both in the same place. He no longer needed to pretend he had a reason. He no longer acted as if he were there by chance. He was there for Oscar, for Leo, for Julia, but also for himself. It was like learning to walk again, approaching with care, speaking softly, existing without invading. At first, it was all a timid rehearsal. Eric sat on the same bench near the yard. Sometimes he brought a children's book under his arm. Other times, juice or a coloring page. He never drew attention. He never demanded presence. He simply showed up, and he stayed. One gray Tuesday, Eric arrived early and brought 3 kites, one blue, one red, and a black one with stars. He said they were to test the afternoon wind. Leo jumped for joy. Oscar hesitated, then smiled slightly. And they went. They ran in the field next to the parking lot. The kites were slow to rise, but when they did, they all went up together. Julia saw everything from the classroom window. Her arms were crossed, and her chest was full of things she still didn't know how to name. There was no longer anger, but there was not full trust either. She allowed herself to observe, but she still didn't know how far to let him in. After all, she had spent years raising her son alone, also raising her own boundaries. On Friday, something changed. Oscar and Leo were playing soccer with other children. The ball came at them very fast. Oscar tried to block it and fell to his knees. The scream was immediate. Eric ran without thinking. He got there before any other adult. He knelt on the dirt ground, saw the thin stream of blood on Oscar's skin. "Oscar, look at me. It's okay. Breathe." The boy looked at him, his eyes filled with tears. The pain wasn't just from the cut. "If I cry, will you still stay?" Eric felt the air disappear. He held Oscar's face in both hands. "You can cry. I'm not going to leave you." Without shame, without fear. Eric pulled him into his chest, hugged him tightly, and felt his small body trembling against his. It was then that Julia arrived, but she stopped a few feet away. She saw the scene, and she said nothing, because in that moment, there was nothing to say. It was something that belonged only to them. The following week, Oscar handed Eric an envelope. Inside, there was a new drawing. This time, the figures were facing forward. Eric with a blue hat, Leo laughing beside him, Oscar in the center, holding both of their hands. In a corner of the paper, a woman in a yellow dress with a book in her hand. Julia. Below, written in careful letters, "My family." Eric folded the paper carefully. He put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, like someone who guards something that can save a life. During the next recess, the four of them sat together in a corner of the yard, a slightly crooked bench in the shade of a tree. Eric opened a bag of popcorn and placed it in the center. Leo took a handful, then Oscar, and finally, Julia. None of them talked about what they were doing there. It wasn't necessary. Their eyes said it all. Time was no longer the villain. The silence, which had once screamed, was now companionship. Eric didn't rebuild what he lost, because some things can't be remade. But for the first time, he built what he never had the chance to start. And sometimes, that's enough.